One of my favorite ways to think also about differentiation is to imagine that you are in a coffee shop and you're grabbing a cup of coffee and you go and sit down at a table and you overhear one of your clients talking about you. Think about what you would love to hear them say. And what you're doing here is you're getting into the mind and language of someone who is not you. So this is perception, right? It's outside perception. So it might be, oh, I love my CPA. She really breaks down concepts for me in a way that I get. Or I love my CPA. I don't know how she does it, but for the first time ever, I haven't had to pay thousands of dollars at the end of the year. In fact, I got a tax return. So you can almost think of this in terms of plain speak testimonials, but also on the flip side of that overheard conversation is what would you be terrified to hear? So for example, you might be terrified to hear, I don't know what I'm spending money for. I could do this myself in QuickBooks. Maybe that's your biggest fear. Well, then how do you respond to that biggest fear? Or, your brand isn't just about the people that you attract, it's about who you repel. So you want your brand to automatically turn away people who are not a good fit for you. You don't want to be everything to everyone. And that's a really great way to remember to differentiate yourself.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be terrific. Our guest is the co-founder of the branding agency Braid Creative and co-host of the wildly popular Being Boss podcast that inspires creative entrepreneurs and provides them practical business advice. She's also a first-time author with the release of Being Boss, Take Control of Your Work and Live Life on Your Own Terms. Kathleen, Shannon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And we had your co-author and co-host on the podcast recently as well. So I'm really excited to get your take on things, your take on business, your take on life. And I know it's going to be highly valuable to our audience. But before we get to all of that, tell us a little bit about your business background and how you ended up being the Kathleen Shannon of today.
Sure. So it probably starts with me going to college for art school. I thought I was going to be a painter, but then I found out how competitive the graphic design program was. So I thought, well, I'll try that. My older sister, who's 7 years older than me, was also a graphic designer that went through that same program. So she kind of paved the way for me. And I got into this highly competitive program and graduated, got a job as an art director at an advertising agency. And probably about 5 years into that, I worked my way up to senior art director. I was really taking the lead on a lot of accounts, including whenever the NBA Hornets came up from New Orleans to Oklahoma City after Hurricane Katrina, I was a lead on their account. But I was also working on other accounts where I was not only client facing, but really managing the budgets behind the scenes. And it really set me up to be able to do the creative side and the admin side of working for myself. So about, 5 years into working at an advertising agency, I was feeling that itch. Like, I know I could do this on my own. I could do it on my own terms. I could create when I want to create and have the flexibility and freedom to travel the world, whether I want to go to Mount Everest and hike through the Himalayas, or if I want to go work from the beach for a week. So I was really craving that flexibility and freedom. I was also really wanting to work with a certain specific type of dream client. So for me, that was creative entrepreneurs who were sharing their content online and really blending who they were into the work that they do. And with my strategic background, I was able to bring not like the kinds of systems and processes that maybe even my co-host Emily spoke to you about. And I don't know what she spoke to you about, but sometimes I think of her as being kind of like the more logistical side to my creative side. But even with like being a free-spirited kind of creative, I still had a lot of strategy and agency background that I was bringing into the work that I was doing for other creative entrepreneurs. So I really got into branding and positioning other creatives who wanted to blend more of who they are into the work that they do, because ultimately people buy from people. I think that sometimes we try to put on our professional hat and end up sounding like robots and really repelling the kinds of dream clients that we could be getting otherwise. About a year after I started freelancing for myself, I convinced my big sister, who was a creative director at an advertising agency, to join me. And so we joined forces. We created Braid Creative. We thought that we would be working with credit unions and financial institutions. That was something that we had a background in. And it is something that we are working with larger organizations now, but that's 7 years later. Whenever we launched our business, I said, hey, I'm excited to do whatever we've got to do and whoever we want to work with. I love working with marketing directors within organizations, but I also really love working with creative entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, people who are really wanting to make a name for themselves and position themselves as experts. So we really created this dream client profile, and it worked for us. So we've been doing that for the past 7 years now, and it's been great. And then somewhere along the line, you all met my co-host, Emily Thompson. We started our podcast together called Being Boss, where we were really sharing a peek behind the scenes of what it looks like to run a successful business and what it's like to be in it. Because I think that we're all seeing these things on Instagram and on Pinterest of, make 6 figures in one launch, or, how I became a 7-figure creative. And that's just not the case all the time. Sometimes it's about being a working creative and figuring it out as you go. And those are the conversations that we're having behind the scenes. We call ourselves business besties. And we wanted to hit publish on those conversations so that people, just like you're doing for your audience, so that people can see what it really takes to build a business that works for you.
I love it. It's so interesting. And, I think the theme definitely between your co-host and yourself is, bringing all of your experiences and the things that you're great at, and as well, just your own personality and strengths as a human being, found a really great combination in the two of you that has now put out something really valuable to people who are actually really doing the work. I mean, yeah, there's lots of people out there in the marketplace offering like the get rich quick type of, hey, just add this one little thing and you'll magically be on a beach drinking Mai Tais while your business is pumping out money. And for those of us that have, there are some people that have done that, but for those of us that have done the grind and done the actual real work of building a business that drives real value, not always like that. So I just love that you've brought what you're great at, your superpower, to this conversation. When we're talking about branding, that seems to be your, and from my take in speaking with Emily, is that you're very, very much a creative person. What's that like working with someone like our audience? They're very much, I mean, it's not that they're not creative, but they're creative in a very specific way around financials and very detailed oriented around, this is what they're looking for, the fine details of everything. How does that work when you're working with somebody who's bringing your expertise and your gifts as a big thinker, big creative thinker? Anything to share around that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so whenever I say the word branding, what might come top of mind is a logo, like a brand identity. But a brand is so much more than that. A brand is really bringing what you value to the forefront. It's that outer layer of, kind of that outer layer of an onion, for example, of what people, whenever they see you on the outside, what they can expect whenever they go deeper. A brand is a promise. It's a story. It's what you deliver on. It's what you want people to know, do, and feel. It's a first impression. So a brand is so much more than just a logo. It's all those things I just listed. And so for a bookkeeper, for example, I think that, whenever I talk about personal branding, a lot of people think about celebrities like Beyonce or Michael Jackson or, other personal brands that are like Ellen, people who have TV shows named after them or have an album or are a spokesperson for something. Or, you might even think about some of these like celebrity bookkeepers, like even those people within your industry that are making a big splash. And you don't necessarily have to be like them. You just have to turn up the volume on who you are and what it is that you offer and provide. And so, it's so funny because, for example, right now I'm trying to find a graphic designer for my company. And I put out a call for applicants and I'm getting these like really long-winded cover letters and stories about how I'll work late into the night and how I just want to be a great team player. And I'm looking for someone who just has really great typography and layout skills. And so for a bookkeeper, for example, I want someone who can crunch the numbers, do it reliably, and not get me in trouble whenever it comes to tax time, right? And so I don't think that you have to like go overboard with your personal brand or blending your personality into your brand story if it's going to confuse the main message of what you want your customer to know, do, and feel. And so that's, the main thing that I would say for your audience is like, what is it that you want your customer to know? What is it that you want them to do? And what is it that you want them to feel? And I think that feeling part is where you can really bring in some more of your personality. So do you want them to feel taken care of? Do you want them to feel empowered to do it themselves? Do you want them to feel organized? How is it that you want your customer to feel? And I think that's where you can start to bring in that brand story and blend the emotional side of what you have to offer into the really practical nuts and bolts side. But at the end of the day, what you are offering, what you want your customer to know is how they can hire you and what it is that you do. So I think that a lot of getting clear in your brand is really getting clear on your offering. What is it that you do? What's the process along the way? And how do you explain that to your customer?
Beautifully said. So simple. And I think often gets overcomplicated.
For sure. Yeah. And it's easy to get overcomplicated or to be too simple. Like on one hand, we see people that don't have any sort of brand consistency. They don't have any sort of look and feel to convey who they are, what they do. And I think that can be a challenge. On the flip side, they might be trying to be so creative or big vision, or even, I found vagueness is a threat to brand clarity. Like whenever you are vague about what you do and what you offer, I especially see this like among coaches. So this might not be as much of a problem for your audience. Like your audience is in a really great position to say, here's what I do, here's what I offer, here's what you're going to get, and here's how we do it along the way. So as long as you're clear on what you do, then you can start to blend in some personality on top of that. And sometimes it's as little as, if you are working for yourself, saying I instead of we. It's really just being a little bit more honest in how you communicate what you do. It might also be being a little bit more plain speak and not speaking like a robot or using industry jargon that your client might not understand. These are really simple ways to blend a little bit more personality into the work that you do.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that the challenge that our audience and many of the bookkeepers that I've worked with, the challenge is their expertise is not the work and things that we're talking about right now. And so they know they want to attract a certain type of clients, perhaps maybe more clients, maybe better clients. But yeah, how do they do that? And, to think about a website or a logo or anything, it goes so much deeper into a conversation like we're having. And I think the opportunity that I'm hearing in this is to give that some thought and think about, number one, the way you see things is probably not the way your ideal clients see things. And so how can you be very clear about what you do, but at the same time, bring the natural differentiator, which is yourself and your own personality, to something that's simple, clear, shows them how to buy what you have, but brings that personality that can differentiate themselves. Because I do hear a lot of complaints about, well, how do I differentiate myself? What would you say about differentiation? And, there's a lot of bookkeepers out there. How does our listener become the one that their ideal target audience customer picks them?
Well, I think that really having an ideal customer is one of the first things that you can do to differentiate yourself. So think about who you like working with the best. We were talking before we hit record, I have actually a few different bookkeepers on my team and on my side. So I've got one for my branding agency, and she's handling a lot of the media dollars that are going in and out. And we're talking like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So her personality and what she's offering is a little bit different than my other bookkeeper who specializes in working with creative entrepreneurs. And that might be different from someone else who's implementing a profit first model, or someone who's specifically partnering with Xero. So not only like the tools that you use could help differentiate you, but who your dream customer is and what their needs are can differentiate you. And that's going to automatically start to narrow down your expertise and what you're known for and your positioning toward your dream client. One of my favorite ways to think also about differentiation is to imagine that you are in a coffee shop and you're grabbing a cup of coffee and you go and sit down at a table and you overhear one of your clients talking about you. Think about what you would love to hear them say. And what you're doing here is you're getting into the mind and language of someone who is not you. So this is, perception, right? It's outside perception. So it might be, oh, I love my CPA. She really breaks down concepts for me in a way that I get. Or I love my CPA. I don't know how she does it, but for the first time ever, I haven't had to pay thousands of dollars at the end of the year. In fact, I got a tax return. So you can almost think of this in terms of plain speak testimonials, but also on the flip side of that overheard conversation is what would you be terrified to hear? So for example, you might be terrified to hear, I don't know what I'm spending money for. I could do this myself in QuickBooks. Maybe that's your biggest fear. Well, then how do you respond to that biggest fear? Or, your brand isn't just about the people that you attract, it's about who you repel. So you want your brand to automatically turn away people who are not a good fit for you. You don't want to be everything to everyone. And that's a really great way to remember to differentiate yourself.
That's such a fantastic exercise. I just love that. And I think if our audience were to do that, a lot of interesting things would come up, not only for working on your brand, but taking that brand and that positioning and those thoughts around to sales conversations, to networking conversations, and as well, content perhaps for the website. So valuable. Tell me a little bit about being boss and what being boss means to you.
Being boss is all about taking control of your work and living life on your own terms. So it really is about blending that personal side of you with the professional side of you. It's about being able to take a Friday afternoon off to take your kid to the zoo. Or it might even be having no limit to your potential and how much you can earn or how you can scale. It really is about being creative and connecting dots and getting into that confident mindset, knowing that you've got this, getting your systems and processes organized in a way that feels good so that you can scale or hire a team. It's also about getting into habits and routines that really help you do the work. So it really is all about doing the work. And so for you, that might be meditating for 10 minutes before you sit behind your desk. Or it might be, getting a workout in every single morning. Or it might be taking off at 3 p.m. every day, or having unlimited vacation, or being able to work from anywhere. Being boss is really just defining what it is that you want, setting these like really big goals and then breaking it down step by step and trusting that you're going to hit hiccups, you're going to have failures, but that you'll figure it out along the way. And that step by step, you will be able to get to your biggest dreams.
Beautiful. Now, this is an interesting, I love how you both refer to it as your business besties. Mm-hmm. What were some of the best conversation topics that you had before you decided to launch your podcast, Being Boss?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think that, and just like that, I think that good conversations start with really good questions. So I remember one of the first questions I had was whenever I was working one-on-one with my clients, helping them with their branding and their positioning and their identity, and really thinking, okay, but there's only so much of me, and there are so many people wanting to work with me. Is there a way that I can scale this in a meaningful way? In a way where I can make money while I'm asleep and help people without being there and be more affordable for people who can't afford to hire me one-on-one. And so this was the question, and that was answered in a conversation with Emily. And this was this was about 6 years ago. She said, why don't you turn your one-on-one content into an e-course? It is perfectly set up for it. I can help you build it out. And so we did it. And that e-course has made me well over 6 figures since launching it. It's been iterated a few different times. And I would have never thought to really do that or had the confidence to do it without really fleshing it out with Emily. And we continue to ask questions. So even just yesterday, we were having more, it's so funny because sometimes we'll have to separate business partner conversations with business bestie conversations. So I'll say, okay, I'm talking to you now as a business bestie. What would it look like if we completely got off of social media altogether? I know that that's such a stressor for so many people, and probably for your audience as well. They're probably hearing that they need to be on social media, but they don't know where to begin or where to put their efforts. And now more than ever, there are so many questions coming up against the ethics of social media, and we're just constantly being sold to. And so I love social media. I have a love-hate relationship with it. And I was like, okay, I love it, but also what would it look like if we completely ran our business off of social media? And as an online business, that's a really big question. And I don't have the answer to it, but really just asking what would that look like allows us to get really creative and innovative and start to come up with even more solutions for our audience who also has a love-hate relationship with social media.
I love that. That question resonates for you. It resonates for me. I'm sure it resonates for anyone that's listening that uses social media to grow their business or in some way. But what I love about it is that there's so many other great questions that our listener could just sit there and maybe write down 2 or 3 questions like, what would it look like if XYZ, whatever it is, to start thinking creative about how you're dealing with business, how you're dealing with problems in your business, how you're dealing with opportunities in your business. I just love that. Now you had the privilege of having a business bestie,
yeah.
Emily. And so maybe that's the other part of the formula is, asking these questions by yourself in a room by yourself might not be necessarily wouldn't be a bad thing, but to amp it up, make it better is to have a business bestie. What would you recommend around getting a business bestie?
Right. Well, there are so many different online communities and there are some offline opportunities as well. So I think that podcasts have been a huge part in making people feel a little less lonely. And that's why we decided to hit publish on our podcast over at Being Boss, or to hit publish on our conversations that we were having, because a lot of creative entrepreneurs didn't have a business bestie and we wanted to invite them into the conversation. So we started hitting publish, just like you're hitting publish. And that alone can make people feel a little less alone. And it will give you some food for thought that you can start pondering on your own. So if you don't have a business bestie, if you don't have a mentor, you can find these in, places like podcasts or books. For example, right now I'm reading Tim Ferriss's Tools of Titans book, which is incredible. And there are so many different prompts and thoughts from different leaders and creatives and entrepreneurs in there. It's incredible. And it has really opened my brain to being more creative and innovative and to pondering new questions. So that's the first thing. But then I think that is incredibly valuable to have someone to talk to have someone to talk about marketing tactics, to talk about branding, to talk about money and numbers. I remember, I felt like my business bestie conversation with Emily went to a whole new level whenever I was like, okay, here's the deal. Here's how much money I'm making. How can we double that? How can we triple that? And so finding that person is imperative. I think that right now there are a lot of, even though I talked about getting off of social media, there are a lot of really great Facebook groups where there's some interaction happening and you can go in there and find somebody, but then you have to take it to the next level and either, join a mastermind or even just find someone individually and say, hey, would you like to Skype? I definitely recommend, if you don't live in the same town as someone where you can literally go grab coffee or grab lunch and have this conversation, is to hop on Skype and have a video conference where you're chatting face to face and schedule it for every single month, if not twice a month, if not once a week, just depending on how much you need it. You've got to make space in your calendar for it. You've got to treat it like an incredibly important meeting because it is. It's going to help your business grow to the next level. And it's not what I love about a business bestie conversation versus hiring a coach is that you're really in it together. You don't feel like you're being like coached, I guess. It's more of a peer relationship, like of what's working for you. It's more like studying with somebody in college versus going to office hours for your teacher, right? There's something really valuable in figuring it out together. And I think that you get a more creative approach and different things to try, like in real time, in real practice.
So cool. Yeah, I think there's a lot of great ideas around taking things from online to offline to, but literally the big theme is get this out of your own head, get it into a question, get it into a conversation. Don't do it alone. Do it with other people. And I know from my own perspective in my business, which is when I hired my first staff member, it wasn't, and I don't even really call him a staff member often. I feel like he's more of a partner. But that's where things really started to gel in the business because I could have those almost business bestie conversations where it's like, what do you think about this? Because my train of thought, my creativity, the things I'm good at, alone on their own has a limited lifespan or a limited potential. But with other people's expertise, what I've found is that it's like, wow, it's like that, add that piece, like putting together a bit of a puzzle. And it's a heck of a lot more fun.
Yeah. And, they don't even have to be an expert. So you were talking about your staff, and we have a team as well. And we are certainly the leaders of our team, but we invite and encourage all discussion. So whenever it comes to podcast content, sometimes it's even nice to have someone without as much expertise or experience because they lend a different perspective. So sometimes it's really about getting out of the weeds and looking at it from a different point of view to have something new to talk about or to position yourself in a new way or to market yourself in a new way. I think that's incredibly valuable and really understanding how you process. So for a lot of it, it's verbally, it's talking out loud. It's why podcasts are so popular right now because we get to chat it out and there's so much nuance in tone and in expression and in conversation, but you can also write it out. So I'm a huge fan of lists and list making magic. And so I'm not really a big journaler. Like I can't sit down. I always feel very Dear Diary whenever I sit down and try and journal like in the traditional sense of it. But if I sit down to make a list, I can really start to process a lot of new ideas and just get what's pinging around in my head out on paper. I think that can be hugely valuable as well.
Totally agree. I have another question for you. It's, our audience, many of our audience members are females, just like yourself, and have businesses. They're running businesses. You have a bunch of businesses, and I'm sure that's not always easy to manage life. I'd love to hear your perspective on how you handle a bad day.
Oh, okay. How I handle a bad day. So do you mean, say more about that? Do you think that, how do I keep it from affecting, how do I make a bad day at work?
Well, it actually stems from a question we had in our Facebook group, speaking of social media, but on the Facebook group.
Oh, good. So you have a Facebook group. So your listeners can find their business bestie in your Facebook group.
I'm sure some of them have. I'm sure some of them have, which is lovely, but I've not asked. I mean, I'm so curious now. I love this business bestie. I'm going to be looking and encouraging everybody to get a business bestie. So I just love it. But I should have framed the question a bit better. What happened is one of our members of the group said, look, I'm having a bad day. how does everyone here deal with having a day like this? And I think she gave some, the situation that she was in, but it was just interesting to hear how the different perspectives of how all these different people were dealing with a challenging day. And when we say a bad day, I mean, you sound like the type of person that doesn't have bad days really, but you probably have like days where you have more barriers or things that don't go your way, whatever the case may be.
I certainly have my fair share of bad days. So I think it works in both ways because I blend so much of who I am into the work that I do and vice versa. A bad day at work can certainly affect my life at home. So I can be quick-tempered with my husband. I can be really short and impatient with my 4-year-old kid. Like that is certainly a challenge. Or if I'm feeling challenged by my child, like I went 2 years without sleeping. My kiddo, whenever he was born, was up 10 to 12 times a night, every night for the first year. So I was incredibly sleep deprived. And that was certainly challenging whenever it came to work. So I think that for me, whenever I'm having a bad day, it really is this series of questions and prompts. I feel like there is so much opportunity to get to the other side of that bad day if you can understand, one, what is it that you're really afraid of? Because I think that anytime a day feels quote unquote bad, fear is the underlying root of that. So what is it that you're actually afraid of? Continue to get down to the nugget of that fear. I find that every single time, ultimately, I'm afraid of dying, right? Like I'm afraid of my own mortality. And I know that this is getting really deep really fast, but at the root of it, it's like, okay, what happens if I don't get this client? What happens, if I can't pay the bills? What happens, I just keep like almost following that bad day into its worst case scenario. Like truly, what is the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is that I die without making the thing that I made, right? Or without it being successful. And that always then challenges me to find a new creative solution to it. So yes, I will have a bad day and I will let myself feel it and I will let myself examine what I'm afraid of, and then I'm going to get back to work. So I'm going to use that fear. I'm going to use that challenge. I'm going to use that problem to find a new solution, to find a new answer. I also find that, I deal with a bad day by just getting really vulnerable. So instead of being a jerk to my husband, I might just say, I'm sorry, I'm kind of freaking out about this deadline. I have this thing I have to design and I'm afraid I'm not a good enough designer. Like I get really vulnerable. And then he knows it's not about him. It doesn't spiral into something else that it's not. So I think I deal with a bad day by one, getting clear about my fear, and two, getting really honest with the people around me. So even like, let's say I'm having a bad personal life, like let's say I haven't slept or I got in a fight with my husband or whatever it might be, whenever I get on a call with my team or with Emily or with my business partner, I say like, man, I got in a dumb fight with my husband, and we might spend like 3 minutes on it and then we move on. So for me, it really is about blending the personal with the professional, getting really clear about what it is I'm afraid of, and getting really honest with all parties involved about what I'm going through.
I love your take on it. And I think it's such a common thing that, when we're having a bad day, often we're just dealing with it on our own. I think the theme for you and what you've built with Being Boss is it's like, don't just leave these things to be on your own shoulders. Spread it across, be in communication, open up. There's so much more, not only from relieving the pressures of a bad day or a challenging day, but to invoke creativity, invoke business growth, invoke, happiness and joy with the people that you surround yourself with.
Totally. And I'm also a big fan of I run my body like a machine. And so I'm a big fan of working out. I'm a big fan of eating really well. I take some really hippie supplements like mushroom powders in my coffee, and I'm staying really hydrated. And so this might sound like off topic, but I think that really taking care of yourself can really lend itself to, you thinking more clearly, to coming up with better creative solutions, to really just taking control of who you are and how you're living in the world.
I don't think it's off topic. I think it's an interesting improvement, upgrade on the conversation or topic, which is, just in terms of taking care of ourselves and leveraging things that can be helpful. I mean, the human body, often I have thought not that much about the ship that's sort of sailing me around here, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is it. That's all I got. It's not like, oh, I broke that one, I'll go buy a new car.
Yep.
It is. And I recently, I'm a healthy person. I think relatively, knock on wood, been born with good genes. I get relatively, I get out, exercise a little bit here and there, but I'm blessed that I don't have to worry too much about this or that so far in my life. And yet just recently I've gone on a new, and I don't even like calling it a diet, but I've started to put new things or new choices, I guess is a good way of putting it, new choices around what I'm eating. Yeah. And I can tell you that my performance, my productivity, my clarity has tripled, quadrupled, 10x'd. I don't even know what you want to call it, but I'm now 45 years old. I've spent 45 years doing what I was doing. And now here, 45 years later, I've just recently have this whole new energy. I have more energy than I think I've felt in 30 years. And so I think it's a great topic to be, if we're trying to do something great in the world, we're out there trying to help business owners. And I'm speaking for our audience. Our audience is out there, the pressures of the world, pressures of life, pressures of family, different things like this. If we take care of ourselves and find a way that works, that how that's going to work for us to really have our bodies and our minds be in the best possible condition to do that, life just gets a lot more fun and I would say easy.
For sure. Whenever you were asking, like, how do you deal with a hard day? I wanted to say a glass of wine, but honestly, that's not the truth anymore. So I just turned 36 and even one glass of wine just does me in the next morning. I don't think as clearly. I love wine on the weekends. I love pizza on the weekends, but during the week, I'm eating, pretty like a paleo style diet for the most part. So like no sugar, mostly eating just clean protein, eggs, healthy fats like avocados and oil. I'm going grain-free, legume-free. This might sound crazy to your listeners, but it really does keep me super sharp mentally. And then I also really am getting into, and I'm not perfect at it, but really trying to get into meditation. And one of my favorites is called the candle concentration. And I wrote about this in our Being Boss book, which also presenting some of our concepts and ideas of self-care as healthcare and how that helps us be more boss in our book to our publisher. It felt so weird, but it really truly is how we integrate living like a holistic life and not just being the boss of our work, but being the boss of our bodies. And so I like this candle concentration exercise where I simply light a candle, and it can be a smell good one. And I focus on the flame without trying to have any other thoughts for 10 minutes. I set a timer, and I found that it boosts my concentration through the rest of the entire day. And so something as simple as that, I'm really trying to get into finding a way to relax my heart rate and relax my mind and get into, the brain waves that are conducive to creativity. You can't work well if you're freaking out. Like if you're in that lizard part of your brain, and what you eat and how you relax and how you sleep and how you take care of yourself, it all goes into that.
Absolutely does. And such a nice turn in our conversation. I didn't know we
were going to talk about this,
but we never know. We never know, but I think it's valuable. And for those that didn't find it valuable, they can turn it off, but I think everyone can ask themselves is how do you feel each day? If you feel like superhero-ish energy to, spend for the rest of the week, 10x, all that good stuff, then you're in the right shape. But if you ask yourself that and it's not that, well, there are ways. I think it's different for everybody to figure out what it works. But things like you've mentioned already, getting rid of the sugar, some of these things that just don't work. But we need as much energy as we can and focus as we can so we can give it to our clients, do great work for them, and then bring it home to our families where they need us most. So love the conversation, and that's for our listener to explore. Go explore it, Being Boss, learn more about Kathleen. And on that note, Kathleen, tell us a little bit about how our listener can find out more about you, about the book, about your podcast.
Yeah, so you can find Being Boss wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find the book Being Boss wherever you buy books. So it's pretty easy. If you just Google Being Boss, you'll find us there.
Beautiful. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've gotten so much out of this myself. I know for sure the listener has as well. I just really want to thank you for your generosity of your time and for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. That wraps another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.